My son sat at the reading of the will with a smug smile, convinced I would get nothing from my ex-husband's $35 million estate. He leaned toward me, close enough that I could smell the faint spice of his cologne and see the shine off his cufflinks. "You gave up your rights the day you walked out, Mom," he whispered. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's will." I didn't answer. I just looked straight ahead at the lawyer across the polished oak desk. Mr. Carroll, gray-haired and shadowy behind round glasses, gave a small, almost amused smile. Then he cleared his throat. "You might want to stay for this," he said. I didn't blink, just folded my hands in my lap, still in the same place they'd been since I walked in 10 minutes earlier. My name is Kimberly J. Talbot. I'm 68 years old, and I'm here to tell you how a funeral, a will, and a man I hadn't spoken to in 26 years turned my world upside down. The walls of the office were lined with books, some legal, most decorative. A tall window behind the lawyer's chair let in afternoon light, soft and gold, the kind that reminds you the day is nearly over. I'd driven 2 hours into Asheville that morning, not entirely sure why. When the letter from the estate office came, I nearly tossed it. It felt like a mistake. I hadn't been part of Delano's life in more than 2 decades. I didn't go to his second wedding. I didn't call when he retired. I didn't ask for anything when he opened offices in Charlotte, Atlanta, and Jacksonville. I left that life behind the day I packed my car in 1999 and drove away with the last $20 from my joint account. He built a fortune after I left. That's what everyone says. But I remember a different version of him, the one who could barely balance a checkbook, but could play a piano like it held the truth of the world in its keys. I was part of that beginning, but when I left, I never looked back, until now. Ernest was sitting to my left, legs crossed, watching the door like he had a flight to catch. He wore a gray suit that fit him too well, like he'd been measured not just in inches, but in ego. I barely recognized him in moments like this. His tone, his posture, even the way he addressed me as Mom felt more like performance than anything real. He hadn't called me for Mother's Day in years. The receptionist had shown us in just before noon. I hadn't spoken to Ernest during the ride up the elevator, and he didn't speak to me until we sat down. "You really came?" he asked under his breath. "That's brave." I didn't reply. I just folded my coat neatly on my lap and sat down. Now the lawyer adjusted his papers and looked at both of us. "As you know, Delano Joseph Talbot passed on March 6, 2025, he began. "This will was written on January 22nd of this year, witnessed and notarized per North Carolina state law." Ernest shifted, already smiling. The lawyer continued, but I'd stopped listening for a moment. My eyes drifted to the polished frame on his shelf, a photo of a courthouse, maybe his first case. I'd seen enough of those shelves in the years after my divorce, sitting across too many desks, trying to figure out what counted as mine and what didn't. Not that there was much to split back then. When I left Delano, he had one rental property, a beat-up Lexus, and the cafe we used to co-own, which I signed over to him just to keep the peace. I took an old Corolla, a few boxes of books, and my last name back. What came after was his doing. The hotels, the management firm, the retirement properties, the private office tower, all his, built without me. At least that's the story he told everyone. The lawyer's voice broke through again. "As stated in the will, both Kimberly Talbot and Ernest Talbot are named beneficiaries." Ernest raised a brow, and I saw his smirk twitch. He looked at me like he knew something I didn't. "Don't let the word fool you," he whispered. "He probably left you a watch or an old record. Just wait." I didn't reply. I just folded my hands in my lap and sat down. Now the lawyer adjusted his papers and looked at both of us. "We'll begin with the real estate, then the investment portfolio, and finally the personal designations." That's when he smiled. Not cruel, not mocking, just a slight lift of the lips like a man who knows something's coming. "You might want to stay for this." I didn't flinch. I've sat through worse, but even then I didn't know how far this was about to go, or how many things I thought I knew were about to be undone one sentence at a time. And it all started right there, in that quiet office, with my son beside me, grinning, and the lawyer laughing. I live in a rented duplex about 20 minutes outside of Heswell, near the edge of the Smoky Mountains. Quiet spot, just woods, a gravel road, and a creek that floods the backyard if the rain hangs around too long. The kind of place where the mail still gets dropped off by a man who knocks and waves, not a machine. It's not much, but it's mine in the ways that matter. I've been here going on 8 years now. It's got two bedrooms, though only one gets used. The other's full of storage bins, old photo albums, and a sewing machine I swore I'd start using after retirement. Hasn't happened yet. My days are simple. I water the tomatoes in the morning, listen to the birds. Sometimes I sit on the porch with Nora, who's 82 and always has a story. We trade newspaper clippings and talk about whatever aches we woke up with. I like it that way. Quiet, slow, familiar. Most Sundays, I walk to the little Baptist church at the end of the road, not because I'm especially religious, but because I like the music and the old pews and the way the pastor says everyone's name when they walk in. They pass the plate, and I give what I can. The rest of the week, I read. I pick up used books from the Goodwill on Highway 276. I've got stacks of them in every room. Paperbacks with soft spines, cookbooks with someone else's notes in the margins. Those kinds of things feel more like company than most people do these days. 2 weeks ago, I was weeding near the porch steps when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Figured it was a robocall about car insurance or some politician I'd never heard of. But something made me pick up. "Is this Kimberly Talbot?" the woman said. "Yes, speaking. My name is Shauna. I'm calling on behalf of the Talbot estate." I stopped cold. "I'm sorry, I did not catch that," I said. "I'm calling on behalf of the Talbot estate." I didn't say anything right away. I hadn't spoken Delano's name out loud in years. Not since Ernest's college graduation, and even then it was just, "Your father will be there too," said half under my breath. "I'm sorry for your loss," she added. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you." The conversation was brief. She told me where and when the reading would be held, and that it was important I attend. I asked her twice if she was sure it wasn't a mistake. "No, ma'am. You were named personally by Mr. Talbot." When I hung up, I sat there a long time. The garden hose was still dripping into the soil, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. Delano gone. I hadn't seen him since 1999. That was the day I drove away with 2 boxes of clothes, a cracked microwave, and our son's birth certificate in a folder on the front seat. The divorce wasn't friendly. It wasn't clean. We dragged each other through court like we were strangers fighting over a parking spot. But deep down, I think we both knew it was a long time coming. Delano wasn't always hard. When we met, he had a jazz club dream and a leather notebook full of scribbles. He'd play piano on Sundays and hum while folding laundry. But something changed. Money started talking louder than music. He got into commercial real estate and within a few years stopped coming home before midnight. When he did come home, he was short-tempered and quiet. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't notice when I cut my hair. Then the cheating started. It was subtle at first. A perfume on his shirts that wasn't mine, long trips for work. Then came the messages. I didn't go looking for them, they were just there. One night, I opened his briefcase to find a document I needed for taxes, and there it was. Folded notes, hotel receipts, an extra cell phone. I confronted him once. He didn't deny it, just stared at me like I was asking him what he wanted for dinner. "What do you want me to say?" he said. It happened. That was all. I stayed 6 more months for Ernest. I thought maybe things would level out. They didn't. One day, I packed the car and left. Ernest was 11. I told Delano I'd be in touch about custody, and I meant it. I raised Ernest on my own for the next 12 years. We lived in an apartment behind a laundromat for a while, then in a mobile home on the outskirts of town. I took a job managing a diner off the highway. We didn't have much, but we had each other, until Delano started offering things I couldn't. Summer camps, a new phone, a used car at 16. Ernest started pulling away around then. I could feel it in the way he answered me in half sentences, the way he looked out the window during dinner. At 17, he said he was moving in with his dad full time. "He understands how the world works," he said. I just nodded. Since then, I've seen Ernest a handful of times. Mostly holidays, a few birthdays. Our conversations are polite, but strained. He sends me a check every December for expenses and signs it with his full name. No love, no mom, just Ernest M. Talbot. So when I got that call from the estate office, I couldn't figure out why Delano would name me in anything. I assumed it was a courtesy, a formality, maybe something small and legal. But I went. I got in my car, wore my best pair of slacks, and walked into that office not expecting anything at all. And then the lawyer smiled and said, "You might want to stay for this." And I did. Not because I wanted something from Delano, but because part of me still wondered why. After all these years, he'd remembered my name at all. Back before the money, before the lawyers, before the bitterness, Delano Talbot was a man who played piano like he meant it. We met in Mobile, Alabama in the summer of 1972. I was working at a small gift shop downtown selling postcards and handmade candles. He came in asking for directions to a jazz club, wore a linen shirt too big for him, and carried sheet music rolled up in his hand. We got to talking, and he invited me to see him play that night. I didn't go, but the next day, he came back, brought me a cup of sweet tea, and asked again. That time I went. He wasn't famous, not even close, but when he sat behind that piano, something shifted in the room. He didn't play for applause. He played like it was the only way he knew how to speak. I watched him from the corner of the room, one hand on my drink, the other on my knee, and I thought, this man lives in the music. We started dating not long after that. Long walks through downtown, late night breakfasts at Waffle House. He used to hum to me when I was tired, brushing his fingers against my wrist while we sat on the porch. He had big ideas. Said one day he'd open a music cafe, not just a place for coffee and sandwiches, but a real space for local musicians, a place where folks could feel something. I believed in that dream. I still do. We got married in the spring of 1974. We didn't have much. My wedding dress cost $52. His suit didn't quite fit in the shoulders, but we laughed through the whole ceremony. We were in love, and back then that felt like enough. In 1976, we opened the Talbot Note. Just a two-room shop with a piano in the corner, secondhand furniture, and framed black and white photos of old jazz legends. We served coffee, sandwiches, and sweet rolls I baked at home. On Friday nights, Delano would play for hours while people drank cheap wine and clapped along. Sometimes local kids would bring their guitars or harmonicas and join in. It wasn't fancy, but it had heart. Those were the best years of my life. Ernest was born in '78. I still remember the way Delano cried when he first held him. Said he'd teach him the piano one day. Said our boy would have music in his bones. But somewhere in the early '80s, something shifted. It started small. Delano began taking side gigs outside the cafe, weddings, business luncheons. Then a friend of his convinced him to go in on a vending machine business that turned into buying a used car lot. Then came rental homes, a storage unit franchise, a car wash. The piano gathered dust. He still played, but not like before. Not for joy, more like out of habit, when no one else was around. I asked him if he missed it. He said, "Music doesn't pay the bills, Kim." That stung. We used to say it wasn't about the bills. The cafe started losing money, not because it wasn't loved, but because his time was going elsewhere. Eventually, he sold it. Didn't even ask me first, just came home one day and said it was done. Said it was time to scale up. I remember standing in our tiny kitchen holding a dish towel, staring at him like I didn't recognize who I'd married. He dressed sharper, carried a briefcase, stopped singing in the shower, stopped holding my hand in public. When I miscarried in '84, he was out of town. Some real estate conference in Atlanta. I called him from the hospital. He said he'd try to catch the next flight back. He didn't make it. I was in that hospital bed alone, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry because the nurse kept coming in with forms for me to sign. When he finally got there, the first thing he said was, "You should have called sooner." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? After that, we didn't speak much at all, unless it was about bills or groceries or Ernest's school. I started keeping a journal just to feel like someone was listening. I don't know exactly when the affairs began. There wasn't some big reveal or confrontation, just signs. He'd get texts at odd hours, started keeping his phone face down on the table. I'd find receipts for dinners I didn't cook, necklaces I didn't wear. One night, I sat on the porch and waited until he came home at 2 a.m. I asked him if he was in love with someone else. He looked tired,
Not guilty, just tired. I don't know, he said. Does it matter? I didn't yell, didn't throw anything. I just nodded, got up and went inside. I slept in Rhinus' room that night. The next day I started packing. I took what I could carry, left the rest. Ernest was 11. Like I said, I told him we were going to live somewhere quieter, that his daddy would visit when he could. Delano didn't fight for custody, didn't ask questions, just signed the papers and went back to work. Sometimes I think he was relieved, like he'd finally cleared space in his life for the next phase. But every now and then, when I let myself go there, I imagined him sitting at the piano in that empty cafe late one night, playing something soft. Not for a crowd, not for me, just because he missed who he used to be. I chose silence over suffering.
But I never stopped hearing the piano. Ernest was mine for a while. Not just by law or blood, but really mine. I raised him in the years that mattered, the years when scraped knees and school plays meant more than stocks and suits. He was the kind of boy who asked a lot of questions. He loved toy dinosaurs, peanut butter sandwiches with no crust, and bedtime stories where I always changed the ending to make him laugh. On weekends, we'd go to the public library and spend hours on the carpet reading together. He liked routine, quiet, and being held just a little longer before school. When I left Delano, Ernest came with me without a word. He never asked why we were leaving. Not right away. He just climbed into the car with his backpack and his favorite blue hoodie. I don't know if he understood what was happening back then. I don't think I did either. The first few years, we lived in small places. One-bedroom rentals, a double-wide for a while, then a small cottage behind someone's garage. I worked odd hours at diners and cleaned houses on weekends. We never had much, but Ernest never complained. I made sure there was food in the fridge and stories at night. I showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, every science fair, every choir concert. Delano sent checks sometimes. Always on time, never late. He didn't write notes, just his signature at the bottom. At first, I cashed them with mixed feelings. I hated taking anything from him, but Ernest needed new shoes, school books, braces. The money helped. When Ernest turned 13, things started to change. Delano had moved into a bigger house by then, 4 bedrooms, a pool, a home theater. He sent Ernest a plane ticket to come visit over Christmas. I didn't love the idea, but I wanted them to have a relationship. I told myself it was important for Ernest to know both sides of his family, even if that side was dressed in silk and marble. He came back with a suitcase full of new clothes and stories about ski slopes and business dinners. He called it a resort trip, even though it was just Charlotte in December. That's not snowboarding, I told him. That's falling on expensive hills. He laughed, but something in him had shifted. I could feel it in the way he looked at our little rental. He didn't say anything unkind, not right away, but he noticed things more. The chipped paint, the dent in the fridge, the fact that we didn't have a dishwasher. The next summer, Delano paid for him to go to a youth leadership conference in Texas. After that, it was tennis lessons, coding camp, private SAT tutors. By 16, Ernest was spending more time with his father than me. I tried to hold on, I really did. I made his favorite meals. I sat with him at night even when he rolled his eyes. I kept showing up to things even when he stopped asking. He still called me mom, but it felt more like a title than a name. By 18, he was fully in Delano's world. He wore cufflinks to prom. He quoted financial podcasts at breakfast. He told me to consider refinancing my car through a more efficient lender. He once told me, "Mom, you need to stop living like it's 1975. The world's changed." I remember, I just nodded. What else could I say? He applied to Duke and got in. Delano paid the tuition, bought him a new SUV, and co-signed a lease for a high-rise apartment in Durham. I sent him a care package his first semester, socks, granola bars, a handwritten note. He never mentioned it. The first time he called me after moving was to ask for his social security number. After that, we drifted into what I call calendar contact. Holidays, birthdays, maybe a text or two every couple of months. He never said anything cruel, never raised his voice, never accused me of anything. But the warmth was gone. He became polite, distant, efficient. His father's son.
The last time we had a real conversation, I asked him if he ever missed the little house with the garden gnome in front. He said, "That place was cute, Mom. But honestly, I was always embarrassed to bring friends over." That one cut deep. I didn't run it show. I just said I always liked that gnome. He laughed. "You're still sentimental." I used to think he might come around, that maybe he'd grow tired of all the pressure and come back to simplicity, that he'd show up at my door one day asking for a recipe or a blanket or just to sit and talk. But he never did. He became successful, just like Delino wanted. Suits that cost more than my rent, first-class flights, a girlfriend who's a marketing executive, they live in a condo with an elevator in the kitchen. I watch from afar. Sometimes I check his LinkedIn. I see the speeches, the awards, the photos at black tie galas. There's a picture of him shaking hands with a senator, another standing beside Delino, both of them smiling like they'd never seen a hard day in their lives. I wonder if he remembers the nights we sat on the couch with popcorn and watched reruns of Matlock, or how he used to fall asleep in the back seat after school, and I carry him inside, even though he was already too big for that. I wonder if he remembers who made him his first Halloween costume, or who held his hand during dentist appointments, or who stayed up until 2 a.m. editing his college essay. Probably not. He became my ex-husband's reflection, and I became a ghost in my own story. So when he looked at me in that lawyer's office and said, "You gave up your rights the day you walked out," I didn't flinch, because I knew something he didn't. I never walked out on him. I walked away from a man who stopped playing the piano. And sometimes, that's the only choice you have. The chapel sat on a hill overlooking the city. Long driveway, stone walls, white pillars, clean and cold like money always is. The kind of place where you don't raise your voice and you don't show your shoes if they aren't polished. I parked my car near the back, away from the black SUVs and luxury sedans. Mine was the only one with a cracked bumper and a cloth seat cover I'd sewn myself. I walked in alone. The place was full, almost every pew taken. Men in dark suits, women in heels and pearl earrings, phones tucked into handbags, but never fully turned off. Some looked up when I walked down the side aisle. I saw the recognition in a few eyes, those from the old days, people who knew me when I stood next to Delano in the early years, before he grew into someone people watched from a distance. Their faces didn't soften, they turned back to their programs. I found an open seat near the back. The pew was too stiff and the air was too still, but I sat tall. I didn't wear black, just a navy coat and plans. I wasn't here to impress anyone. At the front, Delano's photo was framed in silver. He looked younger in it, maybe 50, smiling just enough to seem approachable, but not so much that you'd think he was soft. That was how he built his image. Controlled warmth. Even now, he was selling something. I didn't cry. I'd done all that crying years ago, in kitchens and parking lots and motel rooms. This was just another stop on a long road I never expected to travel again. The service began. A few speakers came up, his business partner, a longtime employee, someone from the city council. They talked about growth and vision, about how he'd come from little and built something big. They said things like strategic mind and unshakable discipline. Then, Ernest walked to the podium. He looked like he belonged up there. Sharp suit, straight back, calm face. His voice carried through the room with the confidence of a man used to attention. My father was the kind of man who saw opportunity where others saw walls, he said. He wasn't just building a business, he was building a legacy. He spoke for almost 10 minutes, all of it clean and professional. He mentioned values, determination, hard work. He thanked the crowd for believing in his father's vision. He didn't mention family. He didn't say anything about me. I didn't expect him to. When he finished, the crowd clapped softly. The kind of clapping that says, "We approve without needing to feel it." I kept my hands in my lap. After the service, I stood off to the side as people filed out. I didn't approach anyone. I didn't offer stories or condolences. I was just there. Ernest found me just before I left. He stepped in close, eyes narrowed but voice steady.
You shouldn't have come. I looked at him. I came to pay my respects. He wouldn't have wanted you here, he said. He said you walked away. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to say he walked away first. But there was no point in rehashing what neither of us would ever agree on. He didn't leave you anything, you know, he added. So don't get any ideas. Just don't make a scene. I almost smiled. I'm not here for money, Ernest, I said. I'm here because I was married to the man for 25 years. That counts for something, even if you don't think it does. He shook his head. This is a business gathering. Don't turn it into a pity party. Then he turned and walked off before I could say more. I stood there a moment, then left through the side door. The wind had picked up and the sky looked like rain. I didn't drive straight home. I parked 2 blocks away from the lawyer's office and sat in the car for a while, watching people walk by in suits and heels, checking their watches, carrying their cups of coffee like props. At 4, I walked into the office. Same polished floors, same quiet receptionist. She led me down a hallway into a room with a long table and leather chairs. Ernest was already there, sitting at the far end with a tablet in front of him. Mr. Carroll, the lawyer, greeted me with a nod. Glad you could join us, Mrs. Talbot. I gave a polite smile and took a seat across from Ernest. He didn't say a word. The air in the room was stiff. A pitcher of water sat in the center of the table, untouched. A stack of folders sat at Mr. Carroll's right. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, then looked at us both. Well, he said, smiling just a little, let's begin. Ernest straightened in his chair like a man about to be crowned. And I sat still, not expecting anything, but bracing anyway, because something about that smile told me this wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. Mr. Carroll opened the folder with slow, steady hands, like this was just another day for him. Maybe it was. But for me and our nest, everything in that room was about to shift. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the first page, and spoke clearly. This is the last will and testament of Delano Joseph Talbot, signed and notarized on January 22nd, 2025. Ernest leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that little smirk still tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was already planning what to buy, where to invest, how to make a statement with his inheritance. That much was clear. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. To my son, Ernest Marshall Talbot, he read, I leave the Lake House property in Greenwood County, South Carolina, along with all furnishings therein. I also leave him $300,000 in securities to be transferred from my managed investment accounts. Ernest gave a quick nod like he was confirming something he already knew. Carroll kept reading. These gifts are contingent on Ernest's continued service as Chief Executive Officer of Talbot Real Estate Group for a minimum of 3 years following my death, or until the company is dissolved or sold. Failure to meet this condition will result in the forfeiture of both the property and financial bequest. That caught Ernest off guard, his head lifted, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? He said, voice calm but edged. He wanted what? Mr. Carroll looked up. He made it clear, Ernest. You must remain in your current position for at least 3 years unless the company is sold or legally dissolved. Otherwise, these items revert to the estate. Ernest scoffed. He knew I was considering stepping down. We talked about it. I can only go by the document, Carroll replied, and this is what your father signed. Ernest straightened his tie, trying to contain control. He didn't like surprises. Delano probably knew that. The lawyer turned to the next page. To my former wife, Kimberly Jean Talbot. The room went quiet. Even Ernest sat still. I leave the controlling 51% ownership of Talbot Real Estate Group, including voting rights and board authority. I also leave her the residential property located at 23 Oak Hills Lane, Atlanta, Georgia, and $35 million in liquid assets held in trust since 2004 under her name. I blink. I thought I misheard.
My mind had to loop those words a few times before they landed. Ernest turned to me, stunned. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. "You're kidding," he finally said. Mr. Carroll didn't look up. He flipped to another page and continued, but Ernest wasn't listening anymore. "You expect me to believe this?" he snapped, turning toward me now. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of mistake?" I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My hands were folded tightly in my lap. I hadn't moved. This is ridiculous," he said, now standing. "She had nothing to do with the business. She's not even in the will. She shouldn't be." "You weren't in his life. You weren't in our lives." He pointed across the table at me like I was a problem to be solved. "You probably talked him into this," he said. "What did you do? Show up last year pretending to care?" "I haven't seen him since 1999, I said quietly. "Oh, come on," he snapped. "You think I believe he just handed over his company to you out of guilt? You left!" The lawyer finally looked up. "Mr. Talbot, please sit down. There's more." Ernest didn't move. "There must be a revised version," he said, "or some sort of side agreement. Dad was smart. He wouldn't leave the business in her hands. She doesn't even know how it works." Mr. Carroll didn't flinch. "Your father anticipated this reaction. That's why he recorded a video message to be played today following the formal reading." I turned slowly to face him. "A video?" "He recorded it a few weeks before his death," Mr. Carroll continued. "He wanted both of you to hear it." Ernest sat down hard, his face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Play it," he said. "Let's hear the explanation for this insanity." Carroll reached under the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, then set it up so we could both see. And there he was, Delano, sitting in a leather chair, wearing a simple black sweater, no tie, no rings, just him and the camera. His hair was thinner, his face looked more tired than I remembered, but his eyes, they were sharp, clear. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if you're both sitting there, then things went the way I wanted." He leaned forward slightly. "Ernest, I imagine you're upset. You probably think this was a mistake. It's not. I made this decision after years of thinking it through. This isn't about revenge. It's about putting things where they belong." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "Kimberly, I never gave you the credit you deserved. Not for the early years. Not for standing beside me when all I had was music and a cheap coffee machine. You held the whole thing together while I chased the dream. And when I lost myself in all of it, you didn't just survive. You carried our son when I wasn't man enough to do it." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "I built something, yes, but you were the one who laid the first bricks. And I never said thank you, not once." He sat back in the chair. "So this is me saying it now. The company, the assets, the trust, they go to you because I want what's left of my name in the hands of someone who knows the value of things that don't come with a dollar sign." He turned toward the camera again. "Ernest, you have everything you need. You've had every door open for you, but there's a difference between building and inheriting. Maybe someday you'll understand that." The screen went black. Silence hung heavy in the room. I looked down at my hands. Ernest said nothing. And the lawyer, he just leaned back in his chair, folded the papers, and waited. After the video ended, no one said a word. Ernest looked like the ground had shifted under him. His jaw tightened, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the table, lips pressed together like he was holding back a storm. I stayed quiet, still trying to catch up to everything I just heard. Mr. Carroll let the silence settle for a moment. Then, like he was used to moments like this, he pulled a sealed envelope from the folder and placed it gently in front of him. "There's one more thing," he said. "Delano left a written letter addressed to both of you. He asked that I read it aloud after the recording." He looked at me, then at Ernest, who still hadn't moved. Then he opened the envelope and unfolded the pages. His voice was steady, like someone used to hard truths. "To Kimberly and Ernest, if you're hearing this, I've already said what I needed to say on video, But I wanted to leave you with something more personal, something not scripted by lawyers or held back by business language. Mr. Carroll glanced up briefly, then continued. Kimberly, I owe you more than you ever asked for. You were there when there was no empire, when I was scraping together enough tips from playing the sax in coffee shops to buy groceries. You didn't care about money. You cared about me, about the music, about what we were building together. And I threw it away, chasing more. I saw other men with newer suits and bigger offices, and I let that change me. I told myself I was doing it for us, then for Nest, but the truth is I did it because I didn't think I was enough. The words landed hard, not because I didn't already know them deep down, but because I never thought I'd hear him admit it. You warned me in your own way. You tried to slow me down. You told me we were losing something important, and I didn't listen. I traded something real for something shiny, and I've lived with that silence ever since. Mr. Carroll paused again. Ernest shifted in his seat. His eyes were still fixed on the tabletop, but his jaw was set now, like he was bracing for something. Ernest, I know this doesn't make sense to you right now. You've spent your whole life thinking success means power, titles, results. And in business, maybe it does. But there's another kind of success, one I didn't understand until much later. The kind of success your mother lived every day. She didn't need a title to be strong. She didn't need applause to be steady. She just showed up over and over, even when no one thanked her for it. I felt something tight in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that out loud, even longer since it came from Delano. You grew up in a world where everything had a price tag. I gave you the best schools, the right mentors, the perfect path. But I never taught you how to slow down or how to listen. I watched you become the kind of man I used to be. The kind of man who sees people as positions, who wins every meeting, but misses the point. Mr. Carroll's voice softened. That's on me. I take responsibility for that. I thought I was protecting you from struggle, but I ended up robbing you of perspective. And now, in this final hour, I see it for what it is. You may not understand this today. You may not agree, but this is my apology, my will, and my final correction. I looked over. Ernest's hands were clenched in his lap. He wasn't the calm executive now. He was a son who had just been told that the ground he stood on wasn't as solid as he thought. Kimberly, you were the only person who ever kept me human. You didn't just stand beside me, you studied me. I didn't know how to appreciate it then, but I know now that's why this is yours. Not out of guilt, not out of regret, but because I know you'll do the right thing. You always did. There was a quiet in the room after that. Real quiet. Not the kind where people are waiting to speak, but the kind where the truth finally lands and no one's sure what to do next. Mr. Carroll folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then he pushed it gently across the table toward me. It's yours to keep. I took it with both hands. Ernest finally spoke. He said, "So that's it," he said, his voice low but sharp. Mr. Carroll didn't answer. Ernest stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, but he looked different now, smaller somehow, like the words had chipped away at something he thought was untouchable. He didn't look at me. "This is wrong," he said. He was confused, maybe sick. "No," I said quietly. He was clear. He shook his head and turned to the door. Before he walked out, he paused. "You think this makes you the hero? You think this makes up for walking out?" I looked up at him. "I don't think it makes me anything. I think it just makes it honest." He didn't respond, just opened the door and walked out. I sat there for a while longer, the envelope in my lap, the chair across from me now empty, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not triumph, just release. Delano didn't give me his business, he gave me back my story. Ernest came back into the room minutes later, his footsteps sharp against the tile. His face was red, and he looked like someone who had been holding his breath for too long. He dropped back into the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "This isn't over," he said. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It carried a sharpness I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, back when he'd slammed doors during arguments about curfews. "I'm not letting this stand." Mr. Carroll raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent. Ernest continued. "She has no claim to this. None. He must have been confused when he signed this will. Maybe he was pressured. Maybe he..." paused and pointed directly at me. "Maybe you talked to him. Maybe you found a way to twist him around before he died." I shook my head.
I haven't spoken to him in 26 years. Ernest laughed bitterly. Oh, come on. And I'm supposed to believe that after all this time, out of nowhere, he leaves you control of everything? $35 million. The company. His voice cracked on the word company. Mr. Carroll cleared his throat. Mr. Talbot, I can assure you that your father's will was prepared with the utmost care. He underwent a full medical evaluation 8 weeks before signing. Both mental and physical health were certified by 2 separate physicians. Ernest turned sharply toward the lawyer. You're telling me he was of sound mind when he wrote this? When he decided to throw away years of my work and hand it all to, he stopped, glancing at me, to someone who hasn't been part of this family in decades? Mr. Carroll remained calm. Your father was deliberate. He reviewed the terms multiple times and confirmed his wishes in writing and on record. Ernest stood up again, running a hand through his hair. He paced the room like a man searching for something to break. This is insane, he muttered. He built all of this with me by his side. I worked for him. I gave up opportunities because he asked me to, and now he leaves it all to her? He stopped and looked at me. You don't deserve this. I stayed quiet. I'd learned long ago that arguing with anger only made it grow. You think this makes up for the years you abandoned us? He pressed. You left. You quit on Dad. You quit on me. I looked at him. I never quit on you, Ernest. I left a marriage that was destroying me. That's different, he scoffed. Oh, save it. This is just some twisted way for him to make you the victim. His words stung, but I held my ground. There was nothing I could say that would change what he believed about me. He'd been raised on Delano's version of the story, one where I walked out without looking back. In his mind, I was the one who gave up, not the one who tried to hold everything together until it broke. Ernest's voice rose. I'm going to contest this. I don't care how long it takes. I'll get it overturned. The business is mine, and you know it. Mr. Carroll finally spoke. You are, of course, free to pursue legal action, but I can assure you this will is airtight. Every step was documented. Your father was very clear. Ernest clenched his jaw. For a moment, I thought he might shout again. Instead, he pointed at me with a trembling hand. You're nothing but a washed-up ex-wife with a checkbook you didn't earn. That one cut deep, but I didn't let it show. I just looked at him and whispered, I earned every penny in silence. He didn't know what to do with that. His face hardened, but he didn't speak. He just grabbed his tablet and walked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The room was quiet again. I sat there staring at the grain of the table, letting the air settle. For the first time in 26 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. I felt seen. Not as the ex-wife, not as the woman who left, not as someone who couldn't keep up with the world Delano built, but as the person who had been there at the beginning when there was nothing but a piano, a notebook, and a dream. I had been part of that foundation. I had carried the weight no one else saw. And now, all these years later, Delano was acknowledging it. Mr. Carroll leaned forward. Kimberly, I understand this is a lot to process. If you'd like, we can schedule a follow-up meeting to go over the financial and legal details. I nodded. Yes, that would be good. You don't have to make any immediate decisions, he added. The trust is already established. The shares in the company are yours. You have time to decide how to handle them. I sat back in my chair, still gripping the envelope with Delano's letter inside. I hadn't fully processed the numbers, the properties, or the power he'd left me. That all felt distant, almost unreal. What stayed with me was the apology. The way he'd said, I kept him human. The way he'd finally said thank you, even if it came too late for either of us to say it face to face. As I walked out of the building, the late afternoon sun hit my face. I paused on the steps, taking a breath. My life had just changed in ways I couldn't fully name, not because of the money, but because a door I thought was locked forever had just been opened, if only a crack. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's story. I was carrying my own. It took me 3 weeks before I could bring myself to visit the Oak Hills property. The lawyer had sent the keys by certified mail. They came in a plain white envelope with a typed note confirming the title was transferred.
I open the envelope at my kitchen table, stare at the old brass key resting on my palm, and just sat there. The weight of it was heavier than it looked. I hadn't thought about that house in years. Not really. I knew Delano kept it as a rental. Over the years, it had been updated, repainted, landscaped to match the neighborhood's rising standards. But back in 1975, it was just a modest brick house on the edge of a quiet road. A starter home, back when we had nothing but hope in each other. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked neater than I remembered. The hedges were trimmed, the shutters had been painted navy blue, the old magnolia tree in the front yard was still standing, even taller now, its wide branches stretching towards the sky. I walked up the front steps slowly, holding the key tight in my hand. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and something faintly floral. The place was empty, but it felt lived in, like the walls still held memories from every family that had passed through. Hardwood floors, fresh paint, granite countertops. Nothing like the avocado green kitchen and orange shag carpet we once had. But the bones were the same. I wandered from room to room in silence. The living room, the old hallway, the back bedroom that used to be Ernest's nursery. I touched the door frames, remembering where we once measured his height with a pencil. I ran my hand across the window ledge in the dining room where Delano used to set his coffee while reading the Sunday paper. Then I stepped into the study. It had been converted into a home office with built-in shelves and a large oak desk. On the desk sat a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart skipped. The handwriting was Delano's, slanted, neat, and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I sat down and opened it slowly. Kimberly, if you're reading this, it means you came back. I wasn't sure you would, but I hoped you might. I wanted you to see the house. I kept it all these years. Had plenty of chances to sell it, but I couldn't. Something about this place always reminded me of who I used to be. Who we used to be. I kept reading, my fingers gripping the paper tighter with each line. You were right about everything. I just wasn't ready to admit it until it was too late. You told me once that I was becoming someone you didn't recognize, that the man who played piano on quiet Friday nights was disappearing behind board meetings and tax shelters. You were right. I kept chasing more, and the more I got, the less I knew what it meant to be happy. I thought I was building a better life. Turns out, I was just building distance. The words blurred for a second. I blinked quickly, took a breath, and kept reading. There's something in the den I want you to see. I never got rid of it. Couldn't. It always reminded me of you. If you still remember how to play that song, maybe give it one more try. D. I folded the letters slowly and placed it in my lap. My chest felt tight, but I stood up and walked down the hall to the den. And there it was, the old upright piano, the same one we picked up from a thrift store in downtown Mobile back in 1974. The bench had new upholstery, but the piano itself still had a chip on the corner and a few worn keys. I hadn't seen it in over 20 years. I sat down and lifted the lid. The keys were clean, slightly out of tune, but they still held their shape. I let my fingers hover for a moment. Then, without thinking too much, I pressed the first few notes. It was shaky. My hands weren't what they used to be, but the melody was still there. The song he wrote for me in the spring of 1976. It didn't have a name. We just called it Kimberly's Waltz. He played it the night we signed the papers to buy this house, back when our lives were full of possibility, before things got too big, too fast, and too cold. I played the notes slowly, one after the other, letting them ring into the quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there listening to the sound of something I thought I'd lost returning to me in pieces. I thought back to all the versions of me this house had held. The hopeful bride, the tired mother, the woman packing bags in silence, the one who had been forgotten, and now the one who came back. I didn't come looking for revenge or money or redemption. I came because I was part of his beginning. I never expected to be part of his ending, too. But maybe, just maybe, we both got what we deserved in the end. He gave me the final say, and I gave him the last note. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who broke your heart left you their legacy? Would you walk away? Or finally sit down at the piano? If this story touched you or made you think of someone from your past, take a moment to like this video, share it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories just like this one, real, raw, and honest, make sure to subscribe. You never know which story might echo something in your own life. Thanks for listening, and maybe, just maybe, I'll see you again on the next note.